Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name's Glenn Keller, and in this demonstration we are going to walk through a use case for using the BMIDE. We're going to edit our environment using a deployment, and we are going to test that deployment. So we're going to learn a lot throughout this process. It's not going to all happen in this one video. I think we're going to break it up into some logical blocks, but we'll walk through this use case together and see what all we can do with the BMIDE tool. So the use case that we have in this video is essentially we have this active workspace environment that we've stood up, and we've been talking to our engineers group, and we have this object in here that we can create called a part. So in here, if I come into Explorer, and then I go to create a new part, say new, add part. If I create this object and give it a name, so test part 01, and click add, the goal of creating a part would be to fill out some attributes, and there's a couple of additional attributes that they want defined in this location. So if I look, their different attributes are cage code and something else, and so we'll just use cage code for this example. But in here, I know that that's a part, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a BMIDE find, or just click my search button, and I'm going to find part. So part, if I open it in editor, I can see that part is here, and it is a child of item, which then is a child of workspace object. So what that means is when I open up part and I go to different settings or I go to properties, there will be some properties that are inherited from the parent elements. So this property here was given to it by item. This property here was by item. But this property was given to it by workspace object. So all workspace objects get that property. So I can kind of tell how this was configured over time as this object was built. But if I come in and I do a search for cage code, there is no property called cage code. So this right here, it would make sense that I would just add the property to the part so that when I deploy, the property is added and we're all good. But it's not recommended to modify the out-of-the-box object types. The reason for that is Siemens does deployments all the time, and those object types may change. And if we add things to those types, then we're subjecting ourselves to the potential that that change collides with our change. So we don't typically do that unless instructed to. What we do is we right-click on it and we say new business object, and we base a new object off of that object. And then that new object is going to be a child of it and inherit all of its settings. It's almost like a save as. And then we can then create our own iteration of it and hide the original. So I can say new business object here, and that's going to give me the new business object dialog. Or I can say BMIDE new model element here, or I can click it on the toolbar up here. So it's really however you want to do it. I like to click it on the toolbar, and then I can come in and you can see there's a bunch of different object things that we can build. I'd never have to find it over here for the most part. There is one or two examples, but I can come in and I can say I want to build a part. But notice I can't find part. I want to build an item. Item is the parent object, so I'm building a type of item that will be a child of part. So I'm going to choose next here, and then you'll see its parent is defined as item, so I just need to come in here and say part. I can just type and it will autocomplete. You could also use the browse button. So I'm going to choose part, and now it will be created as a child of part. So again, the faster way is just to right-click part and choose new business object, and then it will create it with the correct parent. All right, so T7 is added to this, and that is my prefix. That is so that this object type is unique against all others, even if the display name is not. So I'm going to keep that there, and I'm going to call it part. T7 part is different than part. I can tell the difference there, but I'm going to keep the display name as part. The parent is part, and then the Teamcenter component is just an organizational attribute. I'm just going to leave that be. The description is going to be custom part type for additional property. So down below, it's pretty much always going to be created like this across the board. The only variation to this that there'll be is that there'll be a abstract object at the top of most of your new components eventually, and we'll talk about this. It's a common object, and we'll talk about why that is. But any objects that you're building to be able to create in the system, there'll be a primary business object, and they will not be abstract. If you create them as abstract, you will not be able to build them in the system. But if you create them as is abstract, they can carry properties. The other thing that I recommend is not using properties in this location. If you click add, you get a persistent property. And that's great if you're trying to build a string, a date, an integer, a boolean. But after the fact, you have a bunch more options for property types that you can create. So I'll build one here, and then I'll build another one the other way. So in this case, you really need to understand the difference between a part and the next page, which is a part revision. So in the system, when we're looking at the rich client per se, we open this up. If we have an object, we expand it, we have an item, and then we have item revisions underneath of it. So this structure of item to item revision always has to be. You can't ever have a revision without an item or an item without a revision. So what we're looking at in here, we need to pay attention to. The item is just a container. It's a representation of the ID that the revisions sit inside of. So most of my properties are not going to be on the item. They're going to be on the revision because they could be different per revision. That is kind of the key. So any properties that are not going to be different based on what revision it is, if they're always going to be the same no matter which revision throughout time, then I would put it on the item. If the property is going to change potentially, maybe I need to revise the object to update that property. If that's the scenario, then the property needs to live on the revision. And then also note that only the revisions are submitted through workflows. So if you take into account that structure, in here I'm building a part, it is a type of item, and therefore I'm also going to get a revision. So I'm going to go ahead and add a property to this, and it's going to be cage code. So if I write it like this, it's pretty hard to read. I recommend using camel case and using cage code like that. It's a little easier to read for the developers that are coming after you. So I'm going to create that, and then the code in our case is going to be a string value or an integer value. I'm just going to use a string value for this. I could change the length if I needed to, set the initial value to null if I needed to, which I'm going to do. And then I could even define upper and lower bounds, or even get fancier depending on what type I pick, and set it as an array or transient key or whatever. In this case, I'm just going to click finish. It creates it on the part. Now, if I click next, the part revision comes up. I like the display name for this. The description is okay. Now, any subsequent properties I need on this could be the site. So site manufactured. So maybe I build this part, and I have a requirement to have the site that it's manufactured as one of the properties. That property doesn't exist today. So I am going to come in here. It likes to lowercase the display name on me. So I'm going to uppercase that, give it a description. So this is the property description, added for new part use case. Typically, I'd be working in Azure DevOps or something like that, and I'd associate this to the work order ID. And then the attribute type, again, I could choose any of the standard types. We can talk about typed references, untyped references in a little while, but they're Teamcenter types in that case. And then in this case, site manufactured is a string 128. Initial value is maybe not applicable or something. I'm just going to leave it be for now. And then I can come down and say, is it an array? Is it going to store more than one? Is it unique? And so on. So I'm going to hit finish here. And then I've got a property on the item as well as the item revision. I'm going to hit finish in the dialog. And then you'll notice that the new object type gets created right underneath part. So I can double click that to open it up. And if I go to the properties on this object and then search for T7 in the table, I can see cage code is here, and that's because I'm on the part. If I go to main, I can get a link to the part revision. Select that, and now I have the part and the part revision open. Go to properties, and in here do a search for T7 underscore. I've got site manufactured there. Now, if I come down below, some of you have probably been concerning with like, can I make it required or anything like that? So just note that these constants down below the property include metrics like whether or not this property is required. So site manufactured, I'm going to double click the constant and turn it to true. And then notice that in here, this property is set on this object, visible, and set required to true. Do not set the required flag on this. I will go back and set the initial value for the first property first, or set the required flag on it, but do not set visible and required to true on the other object. So in this case, set the property required on the other on this object and add the property to the other thing, visible and required set to true would resolve the use case. So it's just making sure that it's updated everywhere it needs to be, and I'm going to hit finish. So then once I do that, I've added the object, I've added the properties, and I've updated something about the property. I could also come over to the table and click the add button. If I click the add button here, then I can get more types of properties I can create. So far we've only created persistent properties, but in future videos, we'll be able to create other types of properties in the system to see what they can do. Now just note the runtime property won't be created in this series as it's used for development purposes. All right, so we've created that. We've modified a bunch of different elements about the properties. We're going to go in and create an LOV next and really kind of get this defined the way that we want it. So in the use case, the customer would like an LOV on the cage codes definition. So I'm going to come up to the top here and click part, go to properties, and double click the cage code. The cage code in this case is only going to give me options for what type of value it is. But note that there are other tabs down below here. So these tabs, the constants control things like required or visible. The naming rule attaches will control what kind of content can go in them. The LOVs will give you a pick list. And then there's things like prop render attaches, which will help control things like how the data is formatted, or icons, or localization. There's a lot of different elements here. So what we're going to do is come in and focus on LOV attaches. We need a list of cage codes that are available. So I'm going to come in here, and under the extensions, way down at the bottom, there is an LOV folder. I can right click and choose new LOV. I could also do a find or a new and locate it that way, and do a new BMID LOV type. I do LOV, and then you'll see that I get the option of LOV. Click next, and I'll be able to pick what type of LOV. So if you expand the folder, you'll get those 3 types. If you do the new dialog, you get them here. In this case, I'm going to just do a classic LOV. It's what you think. We're going to type out the values. I'm going to call this cage code. Cage codes. List of cage codes. And then you have different types. This is a string because it's going on a string attribute. Exhausted is, do I want the users to be able to type in their own value if they don't like the selections I give them, or do I want them to only be able to pick from this list to populate that field? So if you want to make it required, just use the exhaustive option. Suggestive means they can type in their own value as well as pick from them. So then you can just add your LOV values. I'm going to do 01. The display name that you'll see is 01, and then you could add a description if you'd like. This is first cage. Hit apply, and then add the second one. I'm going to skip the description on this one, and then add the third one. And I'm just using, obviously, examples, but in this case, I'm done, so I'm going to choose finish. It will apply and finish. So I've got my LOV here. I'm going to hit finish. And then this LOV is created and highlighted below. So I'm just going to double click that. And then you can see that it's up here. If you want it to be stored in the database, you're going to keep this option. The other option we'll talk about in the future. It's just a different way to maintain the values. So I've got all of those here. And then under the LOV, I'm going to say attach over to the right hand side of this table, and I want to attach this to my T7 part. That's where the cage code exists. And then I'm going to say dot and choose T7 cage code as my property. Now you could always hit browse here and then search for T7 part if you wanted. Find the part, and then down below find the T7 cage code in the list. So it should be listed alphabetically, and there you go right there. So if you do that, it will also put the correct value in. And then as we get deeper into this, we'll talk about conditions. So I could say only apply this LOV if you're in the DBA group, but not if you're in any other group. That's what the conditions do. Is true is essentially a way to validate that it basically applies at all times. So I'm just going to hit finish. And at that point, I have everything created that I would want. I could also go back to the part, and I could see that there is an LOV attaches on here. So everything else is all pretty much done. And what I'm going to do is just open up the source code definition, come down to extensions, default XML, and you'll notice none of it has been saved at the moment. So I'm going to click this golden save button, and everything will from memory will be committed to my T7 training environment. If I click OK, you'll see that all of the source code is now here. So as we have just went through and defined the reason for defining a new object, we created some properties on that object, went and changed a constant. We've added an LOV to it, and we've investigated where the source code gets created. So I'm going to clean up my environment, and in the next demonstration, we're going to take a look at packaging and deploying this change to our Teamcenter environment. Thanks for joining.